So hello everyone, thank you very much for coming along today. My name is Sonia Martin. I'm at RMIT with Raylene. We're both part of the same school. My background is very much in social policy, so my PhD, which I completed a number of years ago, was an analysis of welfare reform, particularly under the Howard government, and looking at the ways in which policy systems legitimise existing inequalities and the exclusion and marginalisation of some. So certainly a concern with stigma and the role and function of policy as, you know, processes of exclusion has been an ongoing theme in my work. I teach with the social work team at RMIT. And, you know, my areas of teaching are in social policy, sociology, and research. I think that's probably enough about me. So I'll just say a little bit about my co-authors. So Tim is no longer at Melbourne Uni. He's actually left academia to move on to different things. But he was at Melbourne Uni when we were working on this paper. Peter Butterworth is at ANU. He's an epidemiologist. Tim has a psych background. So we were, you know, sort of an interesting disciplinary mix. And Tim and Peter asked me to be involved, you know, and offering sort of a social policy analysis of the empirical work that they'd done, analysing 2 Australian welfare payments, looking at news media reporting of those payments. So this is the paper that we've come up with. My computer's been very slow. So we'd all be familiar with these kind of headlines. And the bit that we were particularly interested in looking at was the role of the news media in the construction of welfare recipients that can influence public opinion and policy debate. So I'll just start by providing a little bit of policy background and by way of setting up the focus of the study. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the theoretical frame that guides the analysis, and then present some of the key findings. So the period of inquiry of the research is significant in that it captures a period in Australia's welfare history that arguably commenced with the election of a Howard-led coalition government in 1996. The government introduced a suite of measures designed to activate the unemployed and to make people much more accountable for the benefits that they received. The government argued that Australia suffered from a culture of so-called welfare dependency and that the state was complicit in this development. So the disability support pension continued to be a target of review following the Howard government. At the time, the number of disability support pensioner recipients had increased rapidly since the 1980s recession. And in 2002, the number of people in receipt of DSP exceeded the number of people in receipt of unemployment benefits. And of note, psychiatric conditions have become the single largest reason for DSP eligibility, and account for about 1/3 of transitions to DSP domestically. Eligibility and compliance measures introduced in 2012 moved to assess people on their ability to perform certain tasks rather than on medical diagnoses, which led to a sharp decline in the number of people deemed eligible. So numbers fell from a peak of 89,000 new clients in 2009-10 to 32,000 in 2016-17. So we were really interested in what was happening both in policy and also in news media reporting during that period. So certainly the figures indicate welfare reform measures may have been somewhat successful in reducing the growth of the number of people in receipt of DSP, and we suspect that the decline has been aided by negative media constructions of welfare recipients. So for the purposes of the analysis, we made a distinction between pejorative negative language and fraud negative language. So the two terms can be distinguished by their emphasis on active or passive agency. So in the former, recipients are considered to be actively cheating or abusing the welfare system, and typified as doing so at the taxpayer's expense. They're perceived to be dishonest claimants whose bad behaviour needs to be punished and addressed. And in the latter, recipients are considered those whose poor behaviour and immorality has been enabled by the state's perceived generosity. From this perspective, the personal attributes of the welfare recipient evidence a lack of effort to obtain paid work and little reciprocity to the state for the benefits received. Both constructions of welfare recipient recipients are negative and could be seen as pejorative. However, a perception of active agency and fraudulent behaviour has an added dimension of calculated, deliberate and unlawful activity. I reckon there's about a 5-second delay between my clicks, so sorry. Research tends to focus, discussions and debates about welfare scroungers, welfare cheats, tends to focus on the UK. There's lots of research in Australia about the demonisation of welfare recipients, but little on news media as a mechanism of stigma production. And there's little research that examines the news media reporting on Newstart and DSP as we've done. I just wanted to say a little bit about the theoretical framework that we applied to the analysis. So critical inquiry, it's firmly situated within a critical inquiry perspective as it is concerned with arrangements of power. I do draw on Bourdieu and his theorising of symbolic violence, and also Tyler's work on stigma. Just going to move through that. I don't know if anyone's come across Imogen Tyler's work on stigma, but she talks about stigma as embedded within social relations of capitalism and as a form of power entangled with histories of capitalism, colonialism and patriarchy. Adapting her analysis to our work, we sought to explore the ways in which news media accounts are part of the machinery of stigma production in neoliberal welfare systems. And complementary to her analysis is Bourdieu's conceptualisation of symbolic violence. So the media's discursive power may be understood as emblematic of the symbolic dimensions of power and inequality. And Bourdieu states that one of the most unequal of all distributions, and probably in any case the most cruel, is the distribution of symbolic capital that is of social importance and reasons for living. So we searched Australia's 5 most read newspapers for articles about the DSP and Newstart. And we made searches of ProQuest Australia, and the first was for articles about the disability pension and the second for articles about unemployment. We limited our searches to the period from 2001 through to 2016. The total number of articles published was greater in later years than earlier years. The general pattern did not differ across payment types, but the increase should not be interpreted as an increasing focus on welfare, as it could be explained by the publication of a greater volume of content across all topics. Documents were coded for the presence of 2 types of negative language, so fraud, dishonest claimants, frauder, cheat, fraudster, while pejorative focused on under contribution, with language suggesting that welfare recipients were not contributing to society. So terms like dole bludger, scrounger and lazy. Analysis of the use of pejorative language did not reveal any difference in change in language use over time between the 2 payments. I'll just move to the findings. So the data shows that the raw volume of references to welfare recipients in the Australian print media increased between 2001 and 2016, given the selection of this period because it was an intense period of welfare reform. This isn't very surprising. However, volume may not reflect public policy debate and welfare reforms, but instead reflect a general increase in newspaper article output, More than volume of articles, the key interest was in whether there were any changes in the characterisation of welfare recipients over the period. Significant patterns of change over the study period were confined to the use of fraud language and not evident in pejorative language. Within articles mentioning the disability support pension, there was evidence of increasing levels of fraud language, particularly in the latter part of the study window. By contrast, articles mentioning unemployment, there was little change. The patterns of fraud language in news media reporting are commensurate with policy changes that were happening at the time. Of particular note, the sharp increase in fraud language in news media reporting of the DSP coincides with the aftermath of the global financial crisis and government concerns about growing welfare expenditure and a rising number of disability support pensioner recipients. The difference between news media reporting of the two benefits is notable. Despite there being more DSP recipients than Newstart recipients, there were more articles about unemployment benefits compared to disability support payments overall. So just by way of wrapping up, it is difficult to measure media effects, but much scholarship points to the role of the media in generating critical debate and reflection on public issues and facilitating accountability of civil institutions. The capacity of the news media to achieve this is evident. The impact of stigma power upon the well-being of individuals is significant. Not only do welfare recipients suffer the shame and indignity of a punitive and residual welfare system, but they experience the injustice that arises from individualised accounts of their condition and imposed inscriptions of perceived poor behaviour and ostensible immorality that appears in news media accounts. I think I'll leave it there.